In this podcast episode, we want to introduce you to our BCEN friend, Kim Colegrove. Come along as Janie Schumaker and Hollye Briggs talk with Kim about her life and work teaching practices of self-care to the frontline warriors in law enforcement, military, and healthcare. This episode is called Why I Decided to Pause First.
Hello, and welcome to the BCEN Friends podcast, where we hold interesting conversations about learning with a range of thought leaders, BCEN certification holders, and industry professionals, but most importantly, to create value and insight for you, our professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. We hope you find our discussions interesting, informative, sometimes funny, sometimes serious, and always valuable. I'm Hollye Briggs, a professional development specialist at BCEN and one of your hosts for today. I'm joined by my co-host, Janie Schumaker, CEO at BCEN. Hi, Janie.
Hey, Hollye. It's great to be here today.
It's great to have you with us. In this episode of BCEN and Friends, we have Kim Colegrove. Kim's story and current work are centered around the importance of mental health and wellness, specifically for first responders, law enforcement, frontline service members, and those serving in healthcare. Janie, could you please introduce us to our BCEN friend, Kim?
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce Kim Colegrove. She is an international speaker and the author of Mindfulness for Warriors, the Mindfulness for Warriors Handbook, and Wellness Warrior Style. She's also the founder of Pause First Academy, an organization that provides online and in-person wellness and resilience training and support for society's warriors, protectors, guardians, and healers. Kim, welcome to the BCEN and Friends podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I am really happy to be here.
The work that you're doing is something that I am just so personally excited about, so needed. So let's jump in. Tell us about your career and how did Pause First Academy come into being?
Well, it's a long and winding road that started when I was a kid. When I was 10 years old, my parents had me trained in meditation. There's a technique called transcendental meditation that was super hot in the 70s. It's what all the celebrities were doing. And my parents had me trained when I was 10, 1976. And so I've been a meditator my entire life. I'm almost 58. So that's one piece of it. Meditation and mindfulness are personal practices that I've just really believed in for a long time. I've used them for most of my life. And so in January of 2011, I quit my full-time job to teach meditation and mindfulness full-time. And I taught small classes and private clients for a while, and then I started to get corporate jobs. So I was teaching mindfulness in corporate settings for organizations like Garmin International, United Way, Department of Veterans Affairs, National Court Reporters Association, and a lot of other small and medium-sized companies, mostly in the greater Kansas City area where I live. And teaching mindfulness professionally in corporate settings is what I was doing for about 6 or 7 years until my husband retired from law enforcement. My husband, David, retired in September of 2014 from a 30-year law enforcement career. He was a police officer for 8 years and a federal agent for the last 22 years of his career. And less than 3 months after David retired, he unfortunately took his own life. And that was shocking beyond what I can describe because he seemed ready to retire. He left the house every day for 30 years with a badge and a gun, but he had a master's degree in business management. And so his heart was kind of in business. And he spent the last 2 years of his career creating a new business with a business partner in St. Louis, and they were set to roll out that new company in the fall, and he seemed ready to retire. A few months after my husband died, I started to educate myself. I really needed to know what had happened to my husband and what blew up my life like that. And I started to study trauma. I learned about secondary trauma. I learned about how trauma impacts our first responders and others in surrounding professions. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to do something to help that specific population. I learned that we were losing more firefighters and police officers to suicide year over year than line of duty deaths. And I just really wanted to do something to help So it didn't happen overnight, but slowly over the couple of years after my husband died, I turned my attention away from my corporate work and towards working with first responders. So that's where this career started. I just started by teaching meditation and mindfulness first to law enforcement. And then that we widened that and opened it up to all first responders. And then we started to get nurses and other medical professionals, social workers, mental health professionals, and I just opened it up wide because those professions all have something in common, which is their job exposes them to trauma and the trauma of others. And on that path, I met some amazing people who were already working in these professions, and they were very wellness minded and resilience minded and very invested in helping their peers and the people they worked with to understand stress and trauma and to find tools and practices and ways to build their resilience. And so at the end of 2019, I invited a group of instructors to come and join me. And together we created Pause First Academy. And our idea initially was to do the conferences and trainings and in-service training and the things we'd been doing. But in March of 2020, when COVID hit and everything shut down, I created the online platform. So now we offer in-person and online training. All my trainers have backgrounds as veterans and first responders themselves. And yeah, now this is what I do full time, is work with these specific populations. I call them warriors because it's kind of a blanket definition that makes sense to me. All of these people that move towards or go towards danger when the rest of us are running away from danger, or anyone in a profession that exposes them to trauma and the trauma of others. So that's kind of where the whole warrior thing started. I wrote the books, and yeah, it's my full-time gig now.
That is some really great work, some very necessary work. Certainly our listeners fall into exactly what you're talking about, where they're helping other people on their worst day. They're exposed to a lot of trauma. And I don't know, having been an emergency nurse for more years than I care to admit to, I don't know that we deal with some of the things that we see, not just emergency nurses, any nursing, any specialty really. I don't know that we deal properly with some of the things that we're seeing. So, wow, this work that you're doing is exciting. And we've got a couple of opportunities coming in the future where we're going to get to learn a lot more from you. And I'm so excited for that. I think this work is so necessary, and we're seeing so much just departure and throwing up your hands and I'm burned out and I can't go one more second in nursing, many other healthcare disciplines as well, certainly law enforcement, fire, EMS, all those folks you're mentioning here. So what a great life's work you're doing there.
Thank you.
Pretty
And
exciting.
that's epidemic, not just across the country, but around the world. I hear from people now from around the world because the books are available internationally.
Mhm.
And it's epidemic now. People, the burnout, compassion fatigue, because what's never been incorporated in their training or their education is how to take care of their own mental and emotional health if they're going to go do these difficult jobs. And the people across these professions are caretakers, savers, rescuers, nurturers. They're kind of built like that, but no one ever gave them a permission structure or instructions about the importance of caring for their own mental and emotional health if they're going to devote their life to saving, rescuing, fixing, and helping, and what they do their entire career. And so unfortunately, that's a missing component, and it's getting better, but what individuals have to do is find it yourself. Find ways to learn about wellness. We focus on holistic wellness, so some of those softer skills and things that traditionally wouldn't be included in these professions, like meditation, mindfulness, yoga, breathing techniques, things like that. But we also talk a lot about multiple different ways to sort of strengthen your resilience. And it's really important for people to learn the mental and emotional impact of this work and how it's impacting you personally and your personal life and your relationships, because people will go through a 20, 25, 30, 35-year career and never address any of that. And unfortunately get close to retirement and everything's just kind of a mess because the professional life was spent really in survival mode and autopilot. And it's unfortunate. I mean, I'm kind of the worst case scenario example of how wrong things can go at retire or after retirement.
Yeah. Wow.
And Kim, one, thank you for sharing almost like your origin story and what is, I'm sure, very difficult to talk about, but it's also an event that happened that really changed the trajectory of what you were doing and where you were going. And you've been practicing meditation, like you said, since you were 10, so decades of doing it. And you obviously have personal value in it, and you see its application across the spectrum of warriors. But how have you been able to promote and engage healthcare, military, law enforcement professionals really to buy in to this mindfulness practice and to this holistic approach? Because as Janie said, and as you have mentioned, it wasn't something that was kind of taught before we decided, like, hey, this is what I want to do with my life. This is the career I'm going to go into. When I teach a class, I talk about how burnout is a predicted outcome of secondary trauma and of being exposed to it. And if you know that's the end outcome, then you should do things and put things in place to kind of help to mitigate that in some way, shape, or form, right? But the truth is, that's not really something that I learned before I became a nurse. So it's something I learned along the way. And so how do you get people to buy into that and to be like, wow, she's talking to me?
That's an excellent question. Well, I think first it's about addressing their pain points, which I'm highly familiar with. And then so they recognize themselves in that. You know, we talk about burnout and stress and anxiety and depression and sleep problems and compassion fatigue and all the things everybody's feeling. And then really primarily it is teaching these practices in a very mainstream, straightforward way using plain language, and also always bringing the receipts, you know, presenting the evidence. These are evidence-based practices. And so I load up the front end of these classes by addressing their analytical minds, because these are smart people. And once we address their analytical mind and they understand intellectually the potential benefits of these practices, then that helps them open up a little bit to the experiment and the experience of it, to give these practices a try. Because not traditionally super open-minded, hippy-dippy, new agey, touchy-feely kind of people, right? They're go-getters. They're like type A personalities and perfectionists and goal setters and, you know, go-getters. And they are the help. They don't think they should need help because they're there to help. And so it's just kind of retelling that story and unwinding some of that. And I've met people that when I first saw them or met them, or they sat in a classroom, and just by looking at them or maybe the questions they asked, you know, you'd bet money against them ever becoming a meditator. But flash forward 6 months or 2 years, and they're doing all the things. They're meditating. They might be teaching mindfulness to people. They're doing yoga, you know, because they gave it a chance. And it's, you know, everything's not for everybody. Maybe meditation isn't for everybody, but there are some underlying and connected benefits of meditation, mindfulness, and other practices that they can kind of pull from. So maybe you just cannot or don't, or you whatever, can't get the buy-in to sit still and meditate every day, but maybe they will start to adopt the breathing components. And so I build in a lot of flexibility. I say, well, okay, you don't want to sit right now for 15 minutes and meditate in a chair every day. Can you just extract these breathing exercises? Because that alone can help you begin to regulate your nervous system. Start there. I think I've learned, well, I mean, I came out of a law enforcement world, so I kind of understood the personalities, you know, but I think that I've kind of come to know my audience, and I've just figured out ways to get past their biases.
Well, Kim, I am curious to know, with all your experience now that you've had, and when we don't, as healers, warriors, first responders, rescuers, when we don't deal with the recurrent stress and secondary trauma, how do we end up? What are some of the top outcomes you see that happen to people? And clearly you've experienced what I have to assume is the worst possible outcome with your own husband. What do you see with people? What's happening to us?
Well, I would say probably the top line, the most common is just stress, just feeling stressed and normalizing that daily, just kind of marinating in stress and being stressed all the time. And then I think behind that probably comes overwhelm. If you let that stress go on, you don't address it, and you aren't doing something to mitigate that stress, then overwhelm. And you'll start to notice that overwhelm in your personal life. You'll notice it at work. And then if that continues and you don't find ways to calm your nervous system to mitigate the stress and the overwhelm, then I think probably the next thing would be a lack of self-regulation, the inability to regulate oneself. And so that typically, I think, would start to show up at home, that you give everything you have at work, and you can't behave in certain ways at work or with the people the clients or the citizens that you interact with. So it first starts to show up at home, lack of just no self-control, no self-regulation skills at all. And then if that continues, that'll start to spill over at work as well. And then that inevitably is going to lead to personal problems, professional problems. I mean, that's going to cause you problems eventually. Examples would be emotional outbursts, anger outbursts, relationship problems in your marriage or with your children, things like that, because you are stressed, overwhelmed, burned out with what you're doing. You have compassion fatigue. You don't have anything else to give anybody else. And so, your give a what meter is set at, I don't give a what. And it can cause you health problems. It can definitely cause you health problems. And then ultimately, what I see all the time, and this is what bothers me more than anything, is serious relationship problems. Divorces, multiple divorces, people who are the more veteran people who are 40s, 50s, estranged relationships with older and adult children that are broken from all the years of stress and all that. And so, it just goes on. And this doesn't happen to everybody, but of course, the people I interact with that share their stories with me or that talk to me that I learn about, that's where I've gotten the idea that it's pretty prevalent. It's pretty prevalent. For the most part, people don't talk about it or they don't admit to it, because you go to work, everyone's just acting like they're okay, right? You never know what's going on behind the scenes. And my whole world is about what's going on behind the scenes, like what's really going on. And let's do something about it before this cavalcade of those 5 or 6 things that I just listed start to occur in your life. So yeah, it's a lot of negative things that can happen if you don't address these things and find ways to bring some balance and peace and harmony and health and wellness to your life.
Yeah, I think too, we may walk around thinking, surely no one else is feeling like this. Like I have a day off and I'm so excited. And then when it's tomorrow and it's time to go back to work, I just want to hide in a hole and bury myself in there. And I remember, a couple of years ago reading your book and just story after story after story, people sharing. And it's like, okay, so there are a lot of people that are really going through some of these things.
It's the number one comment that I hear from people after they read the books. I mean, I think the powerful part of the books are the interviews, because you're reading the stories, you're hearing the stories of your peers. These are people who have done the work you've done. When you do this kind of work, it's very specific and very difficult work. And so your friends who are accountants and teachers and are in different professions, they might not really understand what it is you see and what it is you do on a daily basis. And so to read these books and hear from people, you can sit at your kid's soccer practice and hear everyone complain about all their problems. I mean, that's one thing. But when you hear from your peers how they've struggled, how they've suffered, their mental and emotional things, their substance abuse or their relationship problems, and the people that I've interviewed almost 24 people now. And by the time they get to the point that they're willing to speak to me, of course, they've already healed some of what was bothering them. They've turned a corner, but they're very honest and open and vulnerable about sharing where they were. So it's the most common comment that I hear from people is like, I didn't know other people felt the way I felt. It was so comforting to know, because I just felt like I was a mess. Just didn't want anyone to want to know what a mess I was. So I do think that's the most important piece of these books. It's that peer-to-peer thing.
Yeah.
I think that you hit on several things that we could just honestly continue to speak to you about. I don't even want to like cut this podcast short, but one of the parts that I think people, especially those that you would consider us in that warrior category, that it's the vulnerability and this idea that being vulnerable isn't weakness, that vulnerability actually breeds connection. And that's really what we're all looking for, is that ability to connect with others and not feel alone in the way that we're feeling or the things that we're struggling with. And so kind of, how do you get on the other side of that belief, right? And you are doing these deep dive sessions and these retreats. And honestly, we could get you to expound on those topics of mental health and well-being, work-life balance. Again, it would be too much for an episode. We'd have to do like multi-episodes to just even talk about one of those things. But if you had just a few minutes to impart one piece of critical advice, let's say that we were able to bring a nurse on here other than me and Janie, and just impart one piece of advice to them in their critical care role in this high stress environment, what would you say to them?
I would say learn about self-regulation. Learn that you have the power and ability to calm and regulate your own nervous system. Find a way that works for you. Find an approach, a practice, a skill that works for you, and then use it regularly. Get focused on self-regulation, because that is going to be the most powerful way to step out of the stress and burnout and overwhelm and misery that so many people are pushing through. I mean, it really starts with us and inside of us. And once we learn that and we understand what self-regulation is and how to do it, and we practice it regularly, then slowly you'll start to see that your external experience of things begins to change because of the internal effort that you're making towards regulating your own nervous system. And meditation is a tool, mindfulness is a tool, yoga is a tool, breathing is a tool, spending time with your pet, walking in nature. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. So that would be it. That would be it. Emotional regulation, self-regulation. Start there.
Thanks, Kim. We love to ask our guests to tell us about a person or a moment in your career that greatly impacted you. We just love to hear those stories from people.
Yeah, right off the top of my head, I can say in December of 2022, I was in the middle of an 8-hour workshop for retirees, people who are retiring in 5 years or who have already retired. And we really just work on the mental and emotional piece and that transition piece, not your finances. And in the middle of that 8-hour workshop, we took a break and I saw a man walking towards me. People will come and talk to the instructors on a break, so that's normal. But as he got closer, I could see he was crying. And when he got up to where I was, he said, "Hey, I wanted a chance to be able to talk to you alone today. I read your book and I wanted to tell you that your book saved my life." And to hear someone say those words, it's just unbelievable. I mean, I was just kind of speechless and internally rattled a little bit. And then he went on to say, "I had a suicide plan and I was ready to execute that plan. And somebody gave me your book and I read it and I canceled my plans. I reached out for help. It was the first step I took towards help." And as he's telling me this, he's really crying and he's in a room full of 60 of his peers. He didn't care. And that's actually what led to the second book. A week later, I was on the phone with my publishing company and I shared that story. And a few weeks after that, they called me back and said, "Hey, we're going to start a new imprint within our organization called Books That Save Lives. And we'd like to do a re-release of Mindfulness for Warriors and add a little bit to it, a little bit of a rewrite and include that story." And so we did. That's the second book, the Mindfulness for Warriors Handbook. It includes that story of Keith, the guy that talked to me. So that's one of the most impactful things that ever happened in my life. Unbelievable.
Wow. And I think if you can save one person's life like that, it makes it all worth it. So that's just an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Kim. And I'm sure for that, while it was that one person in that one moment, just the ripple effect of that life being changed for his family, for his coworkers, for the friends that he has, for the people that he continues to build relationships with 2 years out, 3 years out, 10 years out, his ability to turn around to those he knows that may be struggling and say, hey, I've been there, and this is what I found that helped me. And it gives such hope and such light into what is certainly heavy
Oh,
emotions and heavy topics
heavy
and
is,
heavy
for sure.
experiences.
Yeah. And to our earlier point about feeling alone, feeling you're the only one feeling that bad. That was one of the things he specifically said to me was, I never knew that anybody else felt the same way I felt. I mean, I think that's why he changed his mind about his trajectory was, oh, okay, so other people have felt this bad and this low. Other people have thought about taking their lives, but didn't, because that's what these people shared in the book. So, yeah. And so to bring that all around to a point, what I would say to anybody who is suffering in silence and acting like they're okay, trying to act like they're okay, I am seeing these really, really brave, I always call them kind of informal leaders within the organizations. They might not be the boss or the decision maker, but they're the ones who admit to not doing great. They admit to their mental and emotional frailties or being burned out or being stressed out or overwhelmed. Maybe they're the first one to get help, to go to therapy or to whatever it is they do, and then they start talking, they start being honest. That is one of the most impactful things you can do, is to stop suffering in silence and stop living on autopilot. Take care of yourself, take a step, take care of yourself, and then don't try and hide it or feel ashamed or feel embarrassed. Let other people know, I was not feeling great. I asked for help, and my life has improved in these ways. That's how we're going to fix this thing. That's how we're going to turn this ship around.
Absolutely. Sometimes it just takes that first person to kind of like poke a hole in the seal in the dam, like just start wearing away at it a little bit. And yeah, that it is very brave. It is very brave to be vulnerable in front of people that I'm not guaranteed they'll understand, but they do understand. And so be brave. Definitely be brave. So I get the fun part, or I should say, not the only fun part, but I do get the fun part of this podcast, which is I get to ask you some rapid fire questions. And they're really just so we can get to know you a little bit better as a person, and they deal with some of your favorites. So I will ask you, if there was a career outside of like mental health and wellness and the things that you currently do that you would like to try, what would it be?
Oh, well, I'd like to be a script supervisor in movies. Or for television or movies. I'd love to be a script supervisor. I'd love to be that person that pays attention to continuity on set. And that I'm so drawn to that. And writing. Like, I just wish I could work in TV and film. I think I'd be great on a writing team for a show, like a sitcom or something. But yeah, I think like if I only had to pick one thing, it would be script supervisor. I think I'd be so good at that. So if you guys know anybody and you can get me connected, I'd appreciate that.
Hey, this podcast is going to go out there into the great wide world, and you never know who will be listening. And so Kim is open and available. We'll talk about how to
Yes.
get in touch with her.
Do you guys ever, okay, real quick, did you ever watch a movie? Do you ever notice these things? I notice these things all the time. So a man and a woman will be talking, and the woman will reach out and pick up the wine bottle with her left hand and the wine glass with her right hand, and she'll start to pour a glass of wine. And then we cut to the other camera angle. And when you cut to the other camera angle, she has the wine bottle in her right hand and her wine glass in her left hand, and she's pouring that. So the scene has continued, but when they came back to shoot the scene from the different camera angles, they didn't have, something was wrong, something was off. I notice that stuff all the time, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they need me as a script supervisor. That wouldn't have happened under my watch. Okay, didn't mean to take up so much time.
Cool. I love that. Your attention to detail and like picking up on those things, because there are times, and my husband hates to watch medical shows with me because I'm very critical, but I will notice things and I will point them out to him, and he's like, you do realize you completely ruined what is supposed to be a very emotional scene by being like, well, that would have never happened, and that is not the piece of equipment that like He barely wants to watch those kinds of shows with me, but it's because I'm picking up on those details. So, yay. All right. I do have some other favorite categories, and these can be like all-time favorites, or they can just be something you're currently into right now. So, favorite book.
Oh gosh, favorite book. I would say if I have to say one, I'd probably say The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Okay, awesome. I'm gonna definitely write that one down. All right. Favorite movie, TV show, or a binge-worthy series that you'd recommend for us?
Oh my gosh, there's so many because, enter the reason I'd like to work in television or movies because I love television and movies. I really loved This Is Us. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great
Yep.
series. They did a great
Oh,
job of just like season to season, they just keep you drawn in and invested in their characters. And that's something that's not easy to do. I think, especially in the high tech world that we live in and all of that. But they've done so they have some great writers on that show. Great recommendation. All right. Favorite musical artist.
okay, this is kind of weird for me, but currently I've discovered Taylor Swift. Not anyone I've ever really been, but my daughter, my 23-year-old daughter got me to sit down and watch her movie, of her concert. And I was like, wow, she's actually a really talented songwriter and lyricist. And, so I've been just kind of checking out her music.
Hmm. I feel like she's someone who definitely sits down and like writes in her journal and then takes that and applies it to music and songs. And I think
Yeah.
when you've listened to all of her albums kind of in a row, you just see her growing up and life and changing. And I think that's really cool when some of these artists are, get into it kind of young and you watch as they progress and grow. Honestly, like each one of their albums is the picture of their life in that moment. And I'm sure for them, it's pretty cool to like look back and see like, wow, this is kind of what I thought it was. And then now I'm here and this is kind of what I think life and love and all of these big topics are about. So congratulations, you are now a Swiftie. That's
I would say I'm not a Swiftie for
Oh,
sure.
yeah.
I really do respect singer-songwriters. Yeah.
She might get you there. We'll see. All right. This is a question that honestly, you've been talking to us about a lot of options, but what is like your self-care go-to or a hobby outside of work that you do that helps you to reset?
Yeah, I probably, I mean, obviously I meditate and I practice breathing and mindfulness. I love journaling, but I probably would say walking. And for me, walking clears my mind, it settles my emotions, it exercises my body. I walk with my dog a lot. I walk by myself. Like I don't even remember a time I've walked my whole life. It's so like sometimes it's power walks and it's sweaty and it's 45 minutes or an hour, Other times it's just a stroll with my dog and let her stop and sniff 500 times if she wants to. Yeah, it's just like it fixes everything for me, mental, emotional, physical.
That's awesome. Well, if our audience wants to follow you online, what social media platforms or online platform could they find you at?
Well, they can check out the Academy if they want to know about our memberships or see the kind of online courses that we have available. And that's academy.pausefirst.com or Pause First Academy on Facebook, and then Kim Colegrove, author, on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. And I will have those links up in the blog for this episode. So thank you, Kim.
Yeah, thank you.
Kim, it has been such a pleasure for us to get to chat with you today on the BCEN and Friends podcast. We really appreciate you taking the time to share some of your personal experiences and this journey that you've been on. And it's really inspiring to hear how much time you've taken to really understand what you call the warrior people, the first responders, the healers, the rescuers, the savers, really understand what's going on with them and really learn how to help them. And I was just awfully inspired to hear that about that man who came up during the break and told you that you had saved his life. And I'm willing to bet that there are probably more people that could say that. What a great thing to do with your life's work. So thank you so much for that. And we've got an opportunity for our audience to hear more from you. We've got a We've got a webinar that you're going to be doing for us in July, and then we're going to see you in Phoenix in November of 2024 for some in-person sessions with you, which I'm very excited for. So thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. I think all of our listeners can benefit from what you have to offer in some form or fashion. I know I certainly can. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It was great talking to both of you, and I'm looking forward to these upcoming events.
We are too.
Well, I want to take this time to thank Kim for joining us for this episode of BCEN and Friends. Thank you, Kim, for sharing your story, your advice, your compassion with us. And just as Janie mentioned, maybe you're thinking, gosh, I would love to meet Kim and come to a session like hers. Well, you can make plans to come to the BCEN Learn Live in Phoenix in November of 2024, as Kim will be joining us for a pre-conference and main conference session. You don't want to miss this. You can get more information at bcn.org/Learn Live. And to all of our listeners, we hope you will stay tuned with us as we continue with BCEN and Friends and bring you new and meaningful content and perspectives. If you have a suggestion for an episode, please email us at bcn@bcn.org. I'm Hollye Briggs, here with Janie Schumaker, and on behalf of the entire BCEN team, we thank and celebrate you for all that you're doing as professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. Until next time, we are out.